Hi, and welcome to the podcast V for Vegan. I am your host, Anthony McGrath. Today we discover the food that changed the course of human existence. It could change yours. Bread has been part of human history for centuries. It plays an integral role in our daily life and is a symbol of culture, history, hunger, wealth, war, and peace. It is indispensable and has been key in human survival. Bread created the structure of modern-day society and gave order to our way of living. Without this seemingly simple food, civilization wouldn't exist in the way we know it today. The story begins 30,000 years ago in ancient Egypt. But since then, bread has been on a journey across the globe. 30,000 years ago. Bread is the oldest food that doesn't require foraging or hunting. It has been an essential part of human history and formed early human societies. Wheat was domesticated in the Middle East, and the cultivation of bread spread to Europe, North Africa, and East Asia. In the Black Desert, in Jordan, charred breadcrumbs have been discovered that are thought to have been made by Natufian hunter-gatherers, a culture from the Epipaleolithic period. It's believed these breadcrumbs are derived from wild wheat, wild barley, and plant roots and date back between 14,600 and 11,600 years ago. The established archaeological doctrine states that humans first began baking bread about 10,000 years ago. That was a pivotal time in our evolution. Humans gave up their nomadic way of life, settled down, and began farming and growing cereals. Once they had various grains handy, they began milling them into flour and making bread. In other words, until now we thought that our ancestors were farmers first and bakers second. But Aran's Otaegwi's breadcrumbs predate the advent of agriculture by at least 4,000 years. That means that our ancestors were bakers first and learned to farm afterward. Millstones for grinding grain, dated 30,000 years old, suggest that bread was one of the first ever foods and existed before humans became agricultural. Stone tools were used for cracking and smashing various cereals and grains to make them into a more versatile food. As humans evolved, we mixed these cracked grains with water to create a variety of foods, including porridge. We also discovered that by leaving this paste out in the sun, it formed a dry bread-like crust. However, the success of this process relied heavily on the grains available and the weather. The process of finding ingredients and developing practices to turn grain and water into palatable food gave status and recognition to individuals. This helped towns become more ordered and sophisticated compared to nomadic lifestyles where people had no fixed habitation. 10,000 BC. There is extensive evidence of bread being made and consumed in Egypt some 10,000 years ago during the Neolithic period. Bread was a staple of Egyptian food, and everyone from the pharaoh to peasants consumed it. The Egyptians also had other uses for bread, and used types of thick, non-porous bread as containers for other meals. This type of bread was easier to bake than leavened flatbreads, as it didn't need a vertical oven. In around 450 BC Egyptians discovered they could make these meals using whatever grain was most available in generous amounts. This discovery later led to an uptake in agricultural activities which formed larger villages and settlements. As a result, this contributed to the creation of cities worldwide and is what we know as modern-day society. It's believed the most common source of making bread during ancient times was to leave a piece of bread out from the day before, with sugar and water in, and serve it at dinner as a sourdough starter. The toughness and structure of this bread enabled it to last longer. Iberians and Gauls used the foam from beer fermentation in their baking process to add a unique lightness and taste, whilst those who didn't have beer in other parts of the world used wine juice to do the same thing. In terms of cooking methods, these evolved and became more advanced. It's believed the first freestanding ovens with an open door for access were invented by the Greeks, with different breads being made, including pastries and cake. This is not too dissimilar from how we bake today. Universal discovery. Bread is a universal food that exists in every country around the world. Since its formation, there have been numerous types of bread that differ depending on where you're from. Each has its interesting culinary history. America. In the Americas, the Mayans were an agricultural society and were known as the men of corn in their native language. Corn is referred to as ixines and became a staple food in their lifestyle. Nowadays, this is used to make tortillas, tamales, and other bread varieties. Modern-day Mexican culture has adopted these traditions, and corn continues to be a popular part of Mexican dishes. India and Middle East. Chapati, also known as roti, is a staple food in South Asian countries. There are varying stories regarding where the chapati originated, as some believe it came from Egypt 5,000 years ago, whereas others believe it was found in East Africa and then brought out to India. The most popular belief, however, is that it was founded in southern India. The chapati is simple to produce and very filling, making it a popular side dish served all over the world. It was brought to England in 1857 during the Independence War. During this time, the army fed it to the soldiers, as it was easy to carry, provided a substantial meal, and rarely went off. European roots. The Europeans first discovered the use of leavening bread and understood the brewing of beer and the process of baking leavened bread with the use of sourdough. Until the development of commercial yeast, all leavened breads were made with naturally occurring yeasts. So essentially, every bread was sourdough. The introduction of commercial yeasts during the 19th century was detrimental to sourdough, as these speeded up the baking process, making production much easier. However, in the 1980s, demand for sourdough in the UK grew to the point that in 1993, regulations were drawn up to define what could be sold as sourdough bread. In Germany, sourdough continued to be used for rye bread even as commercial yeasts became more popular. Egypt. Different forms of currency were exchanged in ancient Egypt before they began using coinage in the first millennium B.C. Until this time, they did not rely on silver or gold, but instead exchanged everyday goods. For the poor, bread and beer were used to pay subsistence workers, as they were staples of the Egyptian diet. Bread and beer acted as rations to pay poor workers, although there were instances in the Middle Kingdom of highly paid workers who earned several hundred loaves of bread a day. Uniformity of value was essential for the exchange of bread and beer, with set sizes of beer jars and bread loaves from a standard recipe. This ensured every worker received the same nutritional value. Spread of bread. Roman Empire. During 300–150 B.C., the baking industry began to thrive in the Roman Empire. Until this time, baking bread had been perceived as a slave's job or the role of a woman. However, as the industry started to boom, men considered bread baking as a good occupation. The popularity of baking gave rise to scrutiny, and in 168 B.C. the Bakers' Guild was formed, which outlined rules about the practice. These rules were very strict and stated that once you were involved in the practice, you weren't allowed to leave. The Roman Empire offered several interesting insights into the role of bread in society and how it could be used to control people. Juvenal, an ancient Roman poet, developed the phrase bread and circuses, also known as bread and games, which refers to superficial appeasement. Essentially, this means gaining public approval through superficial means, such as diversion and distraction, to hide fundamental flaws in society. A key part of this is also satisfying the immediate, most basic needs of a populace, such as providing them with food, bread, and circuses, entertainment. In 140 CE, Roman politicians enforced laws to keep the votes of the poorer people by providing a grain dole. This gave these members of society cheap food and entertainment and became the fastest way for them to rise to power. The French Revolution. Voltaire, a French writer and historian, once famously said Parisians only need the comic opera and white bread. Despite this, bread played an integral role in French history and markedly the dark days of the French Revolution. Although caused by a number of reasons other than the price of bread, this issue had major significance in spurring people's anger towards the monarchy. Marie Antoinette, the last Queen of France before the Revolution, once famously said, "If they don't have bread, let them eat cake." This displays the monarch's ignorance towards the suffering of their people, whilst they continued to live in luxury. Riots dated back to 1529, when poor harvests led to the Great Rebellion. This involved thousands of French civilians looting and destroying the houses of the rich, eventually spilling grain from the municipal granary onto the street. Things deteriorated even more in the 18th century as the monarch was being advised by a group of economists who believed that the wealth of a nation was derived from its land value, and therefore agricultural products should be priced higher. Under this council, the king attempted to deregulate domestic agriculture and create some form of free trade. This greatly backfired as food shortages and overpriced produce ignited anger in the towns and villages of the Paris basin. Over 300 riots were recorded over 3 weeks, and the protest became known as the Flour War. Any shortage or even a slight increase in bread prices had the potential to spark so much tension, as bread accounted for 60–80% of a family's income. As a monarch's role was to supply his subjects with food, King Louis began to eat the lower-class muslin bread to show his solidarity with those who did not have wheat. But these measures were not enough, and bread was still exploited. In 1789, there was a plot drawn up in Paris to instigate rebellion against the crown, stating the people must do everything in our power to ensure that the lack of bread is total, so that the bourgeoisie are forced to take up arms. Not long after this, the Bastille was stormed. Turgot, an early economic advisor to Louis XVI, I once advised the king, "Ne vous en laisse pas du pain," which means do not meddle with bread. Louis Pasteur. Louis Pasteur was a scientist who first discovered pasteurization, a food preparation process. During his lifetime, He made enormous contributions to the germ theory, which prevents food spoilage and diseases. Born in France into a family of 5, Louis was more artistic than academic in his learning practices. Despite this, he was encouraged by his mentors and attended École Normale Supérieure, a famous teacher's colleague in Paris, where he earned his master's degree and doctorate. He was appointed to the Faculty of Sciences in Strasbourg, and later to the faculty in Lille, where he launched studies on fermentation. Here he discovered that microbes were responsible for souring alcohol, and that bacteria could be destroyed by heating liquid and then letting it cool. By studying fermentation in wine and beer, he concluded that thermal processing would deactivate unwanted microorganisms. Through developing the pasteurization process, Louis helped to save the beer and wine industries across France, essentially rescuing them from collapse due to problems associated with transportation and contamination. Bringing it up to the modern day, pasteurization is rarely used for wines that benefit from aging, as the process kills off the organisms that contribute to the aging process. However, it is applied to many foods and beverages to preserve their quality, in particular milk. Today, pasteurization is still used in the food industry as it enables a longer shelf life, allowing foods to be consumed days after production without going off. Bread in the modern day. Hovis was founded in 1886 and first started mass production in Macclesfield, Cheshire. The process was patented by Richard Stoney Smith, who developed a method of steam cooking the bread to preserve the wheat germ in bread. To find a name for the bread, a competition was launched where people could make suggestions. This winning name was awarded to London student Herbert Grime, who developed the brand name Hovis, derived from the Latin hominis visis, strength of man. Hovis was being sold to millions of households and was marketed as a healthy product due to its production method. It was reported there were several types of vitamin B found in wheat germ, which contributed to its popularity. The bread was sold in £1 and £2 loaves, as well as mini Hovis penny loaves, which are still remembered today. During the Second World War, bread was severely rationed alongside many other amenities, and the brand created many slogans to support the war effort, including the in slices, "Make Hovis go further." Today, Hovis remains a household name and a staple of many kitchen cupboards. Why the name Hovis? In 1890, a national competition was held to replace the rather clumsy Smith's patent process germ flour name. A prize of £25 was offered to the winner. The winner was Herbert Grime, suggesting the name Hovis from the Latin hominis vis, meaning strength of man. Post-World War. The best thing since sliced bread. This phrase is commonly used today to describe how great something is, comparing it with the wonderful invention that is sliced bread. During the 20th century, bread baking was industrialized to make the process much quicker and consistent, so that it could be mass-produced. In 1923, Otto Friedrich Rohwedder developed a bread slicing machine that both sliced and wrapped bread. At first, American consumers weren't sure what to think of it, as they were unfamiliar with the concept. However, by World War II, they were so hooked on its convenience that there was a national crisis when they could no longer access a bread slicing machine. Initially, this was part of America's war efforts to stop producing the machine to conserve the tons of steel it required. There was such a backlash that the unpopular ban was lifted after only 2 months. Is sourdough starter vegan? Sourdough starter made with flour and water is vegan. The wild yeast and bacteria that are colonized in this mixture are also considered vegan and suitable for a plant-based diet. Anthony's sourdough notes: 35 ml of starter, 1/2 of lemon juice, 5 cups flour, 2 teaspoons of salt, 1 teaspoon of baking powder, herbs, rosemary, etc. 21/2 cups water. Cover with a tea towel and sit on the counter for 12 hours. Break it into 2 loaves, cut it and score the top. Bake at 450 degrees Dutch for 30 minutes with the lid and 15 minutes with the lid off approximately. If you want more of a sandwich-style loaf, line 2 deep baking tins with parchment paper. Proof mixture in tin for 8 hours at 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Poke test positive. Bake at 450 degrees Dutch for 30 minutes with the lid and 15 minutes with the lid off approximately, or until the inner temp is 200 degrees. I was asked recently, why do make and bake your bread? My answer is that bread is the staff of life manna. The connection with the simple ingredients is astounding. 5 basic ingredients, only 3 if you do not use lemonetta, versus the 33 to 37 found in all store-bought bread. The cost: 2 loaves cost less than $4. Health: home-baked bread is fresh, additive-free, and my body loves it. It helps me control my glycemic index and enjoy food. Until next time.
This has been a production of Spirit Quest Publications, a division of Anthony and Mary Holistic Health Services, LLC. All rights reserved.